And we can start letting people in. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the final book club event session. I am so excited to share some more time with you all. Another Saturday. I am Dr. Danielle McCamey. I am the founder, CEO, president of DNPs of Color, and it's such an honor and pleasure to have made it to the end with you all. So grateful. Just want to give a shout out to all that made this book club event possible, with our co-partners, the Black Nurse Collaborative, the Association of the Black Nursing Faculty, Coppin State School of Nursing, University of Maryland School of Nursing, the National Black Nurses Association, the Black Student Nurses Association at the Johns Hopkins School of Nursing, the National Commission to Address Racism in Nursing, and Nurses You Should Know. Shout out to the co-founder, Dr. Joanna Seltzer Uribe. And really, really excited for our final session for you all today, but just want to give a shout out to Miss Virginia because she, along with the Black Angels, are the reason that we're here, and also through the work from Maria Smilios, capturing the work and elevating their stories through her wonderfully written book. And then just also just thanking Virginia for charging us with ensuring that this story and this book gets into to the hands of every nurse across the nation. And I'm even hearing across the globe. So really, really excited that through this book club, we've been able to amplify so many stories and share different facets of information from the themes of the book, and really allow other folks the opportunity to share the stage and their expertise with you throughout this book club event. So really, really grateful for the opportunities that this book club has given so many, and also amplified the story of the Black Angel nurses. The second charge that Miss Virginia gave us, now those that know Miss Virginia knows that she means business. And so when she asks something of you, you have to follow through. So the second charge was to ensure those that have a desire to pursue nursing have the opportunity to do so. So we as an organization have created the Black Angels Nursing Scholarship Fund. And so we are looking for folks to donate so that we can offer scholarships for tuition support for those that want to pursue a career in nursing. So thank you to Miss Virginia. Thank you to all for being here. So I will pass the mic to uh, Dr. Seltzer Uribe to give us some words, and then we can hear from Virginia and then Maria.
Thank you so much for being with us since we started last month. It's really been incredible. It's really just been such a communal learning, which is really what Raven and I had in mind with Nurses You Should Know, that we're all like learning together. Um, and I just appreciate everyone's time. And I will pass it right over to Virginia.
Good morning, everyone. I am so pleased that we were able to read this book together and to bring others in to give their opinions and observations of the book, which was all positive. And as I said before, it's such a well-written book. It should be it should be part of the curriculum of nursing, not for leisure reading, but to include it. Maria did a wonderful job of writing this book. I'm very pleased and proud of her. I think I've finished.
Thank Miss Virginia. Thank you so much, Miss Virginia. And now, Maria, without further ado, please take over the session. We really appreciate you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for this last session. It's kind of shocking that it's the last one that we started 6 weeks ago. Thank you all for joining in, if it was 1 or 2 or 10 or the 6 conversations. I want to thank all of the speakers that came beforehand, who contributed so much to the conversation and took so many of the themes and brought them into the present day or gave a broader historical context, which was really important. So thank you if you're on, and if you're not, we'll make sure we have thanked you, and we'll thank you again. We've reached the end of the story. For those who read it, I'm going to probably do a little spoiler alert. Who haven't finished it, it's a little bit of a spoiler alert, but this is the moment in the book that we have all been kind of waiting for. We've been waiting for these nurses to reach a point where they will finally be recognized for the work that they did. And I will say that in all of the years that I spent interviewing the families of the nurses, and even Miss Virginia herself, and I would say, do you realize what you did? And they would say, we just went to work, right? And then you reach this part of the book and you realize they didn't just go to work. I mean, they went to work, but they didn't just go to work. They were part of a very historic, galvanizing moment in global history, you know, one that still resonates today because isoniazid is still one of the gold standard drugs for treating tuberculosis. We also have reached a moment in the book where it ends. It ends in 1952, but the story of tuberculosis didn't end in 1952. Seaview stayed open till 1961. And there were other nurses, some of the Black Angels who were mentioned before continued working there. Some left, and other nurses came in and they worked there to tweak the drug. You know, when that cure was discovered, that drug wasn't like, okay, we're all ready to go off to the races. You know, I mean, the newspaper splashed it, the cure, but it wasn't a cure for a very long time. It took a lot of work, and we have with us today Miss Leah Bennett, whose mom, Curlene Jennings, was a part of the nurses that came in afterwards and continued to work at Seaview. We also reach a part in the book where we meet some of the original trial patients. And these were people that were, nothing was made up. These names came off of Dr. Robichek's lists that his son had given me. And one of them is Nydia dos Santos. Her mom, if you've read the book, was Milagros Delfas, the young woman who came over from Puerto Rico, and she's going to tell us more about her life. And I just want to say that both the way the story goes, this triumphant moment in the text is really important because they're vindicated, you know, and us as readers are finally like, finally, here's a moment. Everything they have worked for in those decades is coming together. You know, the dissolution of the National Black Nurses Association, when the ANA says, yes, you can join us. We now know, thank you to Dr. Katie Boston Leary and Dr. Vivine McDaniels, that it took a much longer time for that to happen. It didn't just end in 1949 the way, I mean, it ended, they dissolved the organization, but there were still issues happening for a long time after. We also come to the points in the book where
Para esta ronda, por favor, vayan a la mesa de atrás, de la esquina. Los nombres son Helen Ponce.
Where the nurses are asked to be part of this very important drug trial. They get a call, Seaview gets a call from Hoffman LaRoche asking them, if they want to try this new drug on patients. It's never been tested before on patients. And they say yes, and Dr. Robichek gets consent. And I want to underscore that. That was all done by consent. They went up to each patient, one of them being Milagros, and they said to her, basically, the criteria to get in this was your death. Death had to be imminent. All other treatments had to be exhausted. And the patients said yes. So all of them consented. And I'm going to now turn it over to Nydia to talk to us a little bit about her mom, who came in 1950, I think she was admitted. Is that correct? Or 51? 50. You're
Okay. Yes,
So
she was admitted September of 1950.
Can you tell us about your mom? Tell us who she was, where she came from, why she came to New York City.
She was born in Puerto Rico. She was the youngest of 11. Upon finishing high school, her sisters wanted her, all her siblings wanted her to go to college. She wanted to come to New York. So 4 months later, off to New York she came. She stayed with my aunt, and she went to work in a thread factory, manufacturing company. One day, either on the way to work or on the way home, some lady on the subway sneezes on her. Well, if you've been on New York City subways, they're very crowded. Somebody sneezed on her, and she ended up with tuberculosis. A couple of months later, somehow, we're not exactly sure, she was admitted into Seaview. From everything I read, it was very difficult to get into Seaview. So I guess she was lucky that she went into Seaview. She walked in September of 1950, and 609 days later, she was the second patient cured by this drug to walk out of the hospital. She didn't talk much about it. While she was at the hospital, she was lucky enough, Dr. Robichek picked her to be in his trial. She had wonderful nursing staff, and they saved her life. I asked her, what did you do in the hospital all that time? And she said, well, there wasn't much to do. We would crochet, we would read, we'd watch TV. She told me the story of one night, I guess she was sleeping and she was awoken because the lady across from her, and she described the woman as this beautiful blonde, blue-eyed woman. And she goes, all of a sudden, she raised up off the bed like an angel into the sky. I asked her if she ever saw the lady again. She said no, she didn't see her after that. So I thought that was kind of a spooky story. On Sundays, they would go to church. Asked her, did you meet anybody? Did you stay friends with anybody? She really didn't want to talk about it. But I did find out from one of the other patients' daughters that because my mom was bilingual, she would translate for all the other Spanish patients in the ward. And on Sundays, she'd look forward to Sundays where my aunt would trek from the Bronx via subway, bus, train, ferry onto Staten Island to bring her homemade chicken soup and rice with beans. What else? Her crocheting that she learned there, or she perfected later on in life. She joined the local senior center. She made tons of baby blankets for unwed mothers. She would crochet dolls for underprivileged little girls. So she was always giving back to the community. What else did she learn at Seaview? Her years there, she learned that you have to eat a healthy meal. My mom would cook lunch and dinner every day. She always had her starch, her protein, her vegetables, her salad. She would bring the most colorful meals to the senior center for lunch. I would go pick her up sometimes and they would say, "Your mom, I can't believe it. Do you ever see what she brings for lunch?" She would bring her little salad, her vegetables, her meat, her rice, her potatoes. And I guess that's something that she learned at the hospital. You want to be healthy, you have to eat healthy. Every day, she would open the curtains, she'd open the windows, draw the blinds. You need to let the sunshine in. The sun will kill the germs, the air. You need to circulate the air to get the germs out of the house. But never once did she tell us she spent 609 days in the hospital until Maria's team, 65 years later, calls the house looking for her because they found her in her notes and Dr. Robichek's notes. They found an article in the New York Times that mentioned my mom. And even then, she just didn't want to talk about it because of this whole stigma. And I'm telling her, "Ma, don't worry about it. Nobody cares. You're fine. You're alive. Nobody cares you had TB 65 years ago. You're not contagious." "No, they're not going to want me. I won't be able to go to the senior center. My friends won't come visit anymore." I'm like, no, times have changed. 2 years later, 3 years later, we're in the midst of COVID. Nothing's changed. People are saying, "What, you're sick? I don't want to be near you. I'm wearing a mask. You can't touch anything. 3 people in at the supermarket at once." And I was like, oh my God, nothing's changed in 65 years. So, that's it. I don't know. What else do you want to know?
I guess, can you tell them a little bit about, one of the things that struck me when we kind of let the cat out of the bag by calling Nydia's family was the power of the stigma of tuberculosis and the power of othering people who are sick. And we saw this with COVID. I mean, you mentioned COVID, but originally, it was considered, people started calling it a Chinese disease. Once again, using a microbe or a virus to, advance the xenophobia that exists and to politicize it and then to racialize it. And then you layer that on top of the fact that, your mom she was an immigrant in her own country and the immigrants were maligned. And so, that story was so powerful to me that, here was a person, you hear the stigma, but, how many people do you meet that are 90 that are still carrying the stigma around with them and afraid that when they go to their senior center to make hats, that people are going to walk away from them, which goes back to the very beginning of the book when Edna arrives in Staten Island and she gets on the bus. And there's that quote from one of the nurses who said, "We got on the bus and people moved away from us like we had the plague, like we were walking contagion and we were going to fling the bacteria onto somebody else." But it was also the color of their skin. And so I think that your mom's story is so powerful in so many ways, but that stigma, it's kind of the thing where people say you shouldn't teachers need to be careful what they say to students because it stays with them. And that's what, happened with tuberculosis. And it still happens. It happened with AIDS. It's still happening with people who are suffering from long COVID. And so that story really, it was powerful for many ways. Can you tell them how she came to be okay that, originally her mom did not want us to use her name in the book. And we were fine with that. We talked about either putting her initials or using a different name. But then she finally came to peace with it, right? Would you say that?
Yes, she finally said, okay. She was afraid. She didn't want me to tell my sister. She didn't want me to tell my daughter, my nieces, because she was afraid that we weren't going to come visit her. She was afraid that we would think that she was going to be contagious. And I told her, I said, "Mom, there's nothing to worry about. If you were going to give us TB, if you were contagious, we would have gotten it already. It wouldn't take this long. It's fine. Things have changed." And eventually, I think what changed her mind was we went to your talk over on Staten Island. Well, it was at the very beginning, it was you, Virginia Allen was there, and my mom was there. And you weren't going to mention my mom. And we were sitting right behind Virginia. And Virginia turned around and said to my mother, absolutely not. I am going to mention your name. And she stood up and she introduced my mother, and my mother did stand up and she talked to people, and she saw that the reaction that these people gave her, they were all like, oh my God, it's wonderful. I can't believe you're alive. That's wonderful. You survived this. That's great. What a story. And I think after that, she came to terms with it. I think that's when it really hit her that, you know what, people really don't care.
Yeah. And I was grateful that she was able to come. Thank you. I want to just transition a little bit because I want Leah to have some time to talk.
Mhm.
Your mom came, and so we have this moment in history where Nydia's mom is cured and she walks out of Seaview, and some patients start walking out, but they're still, the hospital is still there. And it continues for another 9 years. Seaview stays open for another 9 years. It wasn't till 1961 that the last patient walked out, and it closed as a tuberculosis hospital. Can you tell us a little bit about your mom, Curlene, who she is, where she came from, and how she ended up at Seaview Hospital in the mid-50s?
Sure. Thank you for doing this too. I appreciate you all being here and sharing. My mama was born in Tennessee, in Columbia, Tennessee. So she came up north when she was like 4, but she did her schooling on Staten Island and graduated from St. Peter's High School. And she worked her way. She wanted to be a nurse. She definitely wanted to do that. And most of her focus was really on public health. So she excelled at Bellevue. And when she graduated in 57, and she heard about the call already at Seaview on Staten Island for nurses. She's a registered nurse. It made sense to her. I have the training. I understand infectious disease control. As a matter of fact, I found out a lot of Seaview sent a lot of their nurses over to Bellevue for that type of training. And my mom came back home after graduation with that knowledge. And the director of nursing at the time, Anna Eliza Giles, Mama likes to say her name, was ecstatic that, because she was a Bellevue grad, and she was ecstatic that another Bellevue grad, a Black Bellevue grad, wanted to come to Seaview. And so Mama had an in, and for her, it was convenient because she already lived on Staten Island, but it was also a great way for her to put so much of what she had learned. You know, I remembered her and my grandma telling me about how nurses were trained back then versus how they're trained now. And there were a lot of real world experiences that they had. So when you mentioned the smell, Mama could remember, you know, walking through the corridors in certain sections where people were smoking, and that mixed with the sickness that was there. Those things stayed in her mind, but she never talked about it. And it wasn't until maybe like around 2012 when I was asked to come to Sandy Ground and talk about it for StoryCorps, that I really got deeper into what made my mama want to come to Seaview and really help be a part of the solution. She talks about the streptomycin and injecting it, having to inject it. And she said it was almost like injecting Elmer's glue into the veins of these patients. And these were the things that they were trying out at the time that, you know, she was tasked with doing daily. Her wards, they were given, I mean, it could be anywhere from 30 to 50 or more patients per nurse. And she had to attend to every single one of them herself, like a lot of the nurses. So when you think about the way they were stretched to meet the needs, it's pretty extraordinary. My mom stayed there for a year because, like I said, she really wanted to do public health nursing. And when she got the call from the city that they could use her, much to Anna Eliza Giles' dismay, Mama wanted to take on that. And she ended up being one of the nurses. She was a school nurse, but she also did the wellness checks once people were released from Seaview, going to a lot of the apartment complexes. She would tell me about apartment complexes, the tenements of New York at the time, and having to make sure people were taking their medicine. And she really had a full circle moment because her nursing career is vast. I was born in Liberia, West Africa, because Mama took all her talents to Liberia in the 60s, early 60s, and ended up starting well baby clinics. She taught nutrition and stayed there for 4 years, came back with 3 children. And in her career, she ended up retiring from Seaview as an assistant director of nursing. She put her last, I think, about 20 years of her administrative career in Seaview. So it was, like I said, a full circle moment for her.
Just to give context to this, when Seaview closed in 1961 as a TB sanatorium, TB hospital sanatorium, there were 8 pavilions. If you see at the beginning of the book, you see them on that it's sort of like a half moon. The city came in the late 60s, or early 70s actually, and raised 4 of them and built the Dr. Edward Robichak. At the time, it was a rehabilitation center. I believe it began for like acute or traumatic brain injuries. It's since changed. It's now more of how would you describe it? Is it like, well, Virginia, what is it exactly there? Is it a rehabilitation, long-term rehab center?
Nursing home. I think it's a nursing home.
And trauma, the trauma
Wait,
unit.
Say it again, because you were on mute.
No, I'm not on mute.
We can hear you now. Yeah.
It is a skilled nursing facility.
Okay.
With a ward for head injuries.
Yeah, so that opened in the 70s, and that's where your mom, Leah, your mom went back to work, and also Miss Jane Lyons was there as well, who was the first African-American director. Is that correct?
Executive director of all of Seaview Hospital.
Yeah. So the hospital as a TB hospital never opened again. As we know, Miss Virginia lives in the restored nurses residence among the hollowed out remains of those buildings. But if you shift over from when you leave that nursing, the nurse's residence, just maybe, I don't know, not even a 2-minute walk, you see the new facility, the Edward Robichak building, where your mom worked, right? You want to tell us what did she do there in that?
Yeah, as assistant director of nursing, she was also over discharge planning, and she was instrumental in helping bring the head injury, a bigger head injury unit to the island. My mom worked that late shift, 11 to 7, with the residents. One of my cousins, actually, my elderly cousins, ended up staying at Seaview in the rehabilitation part. So when my mom was there in her last 20 or so years, she oversaw the patients coming in and out, especially the traumatic brain injury patients and long-term care patients. She was responsible for their care teams, for, as I said, discharge planning, making sure their relatives were apprised of, their stay and what they needed. She helped me navigate my elders' stay there based on her experience, thank God. And she got great care at Seaview. The grounds are such that they're very therapeutic. So there was my mom was always, meditation is very important to her. So there's a area there that she frequented, and also, invited a lot of her staff in. So they knew her to be someone who's a praying woman, and she would take time during her shift to step away and meditate. And it was interesting because when I brought my elder there, it was great to come back and people were like, "You're Miss Jennings' daughter?" Oh, we loved Miss Jennings. She was so great as a boss. And so it was nice to come back, to come to her old job, and get that kind of feedback. She was a beloved administrator there among her staff.
I think one of the things that the after story of Seaview, like when my book ends, and it had to end because that was the triumphant moment in the story that I was telling, is that the hospital itself, even after it closed as a TB hospital, continued to uplift this community and women, nurses, who had been there before, and as your mom, Curlene, came back later. But it also, maybe Virginia, can you speak a little bit to what the hospital means to that community? You live on the grounds. Like, what does it offer beyond just a hospital? Can you tell them a little bit about the pathology lab being now the ballet a little bit?
Well, we're happy to have the Robotech Center. It's the #1 facility for head injury and skilled nursing care. And if you became available to, or you lived long enough, you'd want to go there because the care is exceptional. They are well staffed, and they have many extracurricular activities for the patients, including a wellness, I guess you would call it a garden, but it's in a terrarium. It's a very peaceful place to spend time.
It's
and
beautiful.
The grounds are kept up. The grounds are pretty much the same as it was when I came here in 1947. But some of the buildings have been renovated for other use. Camelot has 2 buildings, one for males and the other for females. And the pink building that you see as you're coming into the circle has been renovated for Camelot's women.
Camelot is a rehab. It's like a halfway house. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So they're using the buildings, they've renovated them on the grounds, and the pink building to which Virginia is referring used to be the administration building. So when you first, I describe it in the beginning, when you first come into Seaview, every single patient would pass through that building, and they had a separate entrance for men and a separate entrance for women. And it's there that you would have, entered. They would have put your name in that big registry, which you can see at the it's on display at the Staten Island Museum now. It's part of the exhibit. And so they would put the name in the big registry, and then you'd get checked out, and then you'd be sent to whatever ward you would be sent to. So that building it's beautiful. If you ever have the opportunity to go see it, it's original. It's standing. And when I was there last week, it's all cleaned out. So I guess they're preparing to fix it inside for people. But my favorite part of the grounds is the pathology lab where Dr. Robotech worked. And part of it is being used for the Staten Island Ballet, where Virginia volunteers her time, right?
All of it. The whole
All of it.
I'm on the board there at the Staten Island Ballet, and I volunteer there 2 days a week, just signing the students in and out, communicating with their parents.
And then there is a
Mhm.
go ahead, go ahead. I was going to say Colony Hall was where they would hold these for the patients. They would invite them and they could watch movies. Sometimes they had dances or they had Christmas, and that is in use. It's been renovated and it's in use for weddings. It's a beautiful old building with these gorgeous arched windows. And the church, one of the churches, is being used by a theater company. And all of them are in their original form. That has not been renovated. That's kind of spooky though, if you go inside.
This is a landmark property,
Mhm.
so they can't change the outside.
So all that to say is that Seaview, even when it closed, continued to be part of the Staten Island community and community to the nurses who had worked in the TB sanatorium and then who later either came back in different capacities, like, Curlene or like Virginia, who returned and now is volunteering her time on the same property. So I guess I want to see, does anybody have questions? Do you remarks as we kind of come to the last, like maybe 15 minutes or so of this really awesome book club that reached so many people? Feel free to put them in the chat, or if you want to come on camera and ask.
Willa said, Maria, you have ignited these embers in my mind to tell all the stories that I have for public health. Yes, you have so many that you've even just shared with us. Thank you for being here and participating. And Miss Allen, so honored and humbled to know you and your story. The families that shared information, thank you so much. And if anyone has questions for either Nydia or Leah or Maria or Virginia, you can feel free to just come off mute and speak the questions, or in the chat, whatever is comfortable for you.
If not, I can throw out a question to everybody. So I'll throw out a question. Those who finished the book, do you feel that the nurses got their moment? Like, do you feel that in what they did was recognized? Well, it wasn't recognized then, but in the story, when you came to the end of it, were you shocked at what happened? Or, I guess I just want to see how people responded to the end of it. Or what was shocking to you, or what wasn't shocking?
You evidently did a very good job. Maria.
I hope so.
Not too many questions.
There is a question here.
Dr. DeWitty, a very renowned nursing legend, actually, and who gave a keynote in last year's 2022 DNP of Color conference, is what was the primary motivator to research and tell this story? Is her question.
I love that question. There were a number of motivating factors. The one was obviously when I started talking to Virginia and more of the story started coming out, and I went to her home and walked the grounds with her. I thought, here's a story about women in science, these are Black women in science, and the story had not been told, and I was shocked as to why. And I always use the metaphor that it did exist in Staten Island. It got to the ferry, but it never actually got to the other side where Manhattan was, because trust me, there's journalists waiting on that ferry port, waiting to gobble up stories. And then the other part was, and so that was a motivating factor, that it was just this wonderful, like, story of American history, Black history, women's history, New York history. The other motivating factor was the story of the patients. I come from an immigrant family. I'm a first-generation immigrant. My family came from Greece. My grandfather had a wonderful experience in America. My mom's mom and her family did not. My mother's sister When they came here after Hitler had invaded their village in Greece, they did not want to come. She came reluctantly. And her youngest daughter was 4 and she got hit by a truck. They didn't understand the language and they tried to navigate a healthcare system that was awful. And so they messed up her leg. They put these pins in it and it was short. They cut off her growth on it. And so my grandmother, that was her first experience in America. And she never was able to talk about it because she didn't have language. She didn't understand English. And so when I started reading about the people that were sent to Seaview and how they were perceived as uncultured, uncouth, immoral, and polluted, there was this whole immigrant story that needed to be told. And so many of them were sent to Potter's Field, which is the field for paupers. If you're not familiar with New York, it's a whole island called Hart Island, where people were sent there and buried in mass graves, stacked 5 high. And they didn't have any markers. And I thought, this is the saddest thing that I have read. And so you had these 2 groups of people, these Black nurses who were considered secondary citizens in their own country. And you had the immigrants who came over and were considered secondary citizens in a country that they were working to build. And they were sent to a pest house. And I was like, what a story. What an incredible story and so that was the impetus of me wanting to tell both of those stories and give credence to the patients and the nurses at the same time. And the thing was, the nurses were the first people to see the patients as as human beings. And it was so, moving and it was like a mix of all of these, like the sacred and the profane coming together all at the same time in a place where people were sent to die. And so that really was like a long-winded way of saying the impetus was those 2 concurrent stories. Obviously, the race for the cure was fascinating to me too, how people worked doggedly for decades and centuries to try and find a cure for this particular disease. And the most, satisfying thing was that it was found at Seaview and not a single drug company could own the patent. And nobody capitalized off of that drug. And they don't. It's if the person who would have owned the patent would have been, Bill Gates would have looked poor next to them. Like that drug, that's what everybody wanted. They saw money and they couldn't get it. And that was probably one of the most satisfying moments in the text as well, because Robichek had said, nobody should capitalize off disease, particularly tuberculosis. And, as I mentioned, he worked at Seaview for free.
I understand in the future, we are going to have a vaccine very shortly that will cure tuberculosis.
Yeah.
Just as we got a vaccine to cure smallpox in the 70s.
There's another question. Do you know where was the first recorded case of tuberculosis? I do, as a matter of fact. The first recorded case of tuberculosis goes back to Homo erectus man, 500,000 years ago. They found the skull of a young boy buried in now what is modern day Turkey. And on his skull, they found lesions of tuberculosis. There's also concurrently buried beneath where Israel is, it was a city, and they found a mother and son hugging, and they found TB lesions on them. So it goes, originally they thought it only went back to like antiquity, but new research shows, I think it was in 2007 or 8 or 9, that these archaeologists discovered this skull of this Homo erectus young boy. And that was like, they're saying that's the first recorded case of tuberculosis.
Miss Virginia, could you speak to some of your experience since when you worked at Seaview, it was both pre and post the cure? Some of the things that Maria kind of spoke to in the book was this sense that the patients were there as like palliative care almost, because there was little to do for them.
I touched something that took oh, you did that. Okay.
And so can you explain for
I
yourself
was reading
to
the
paint
chat.
the picture? Yeah, if you could paint the picture for us, what it was like to be a nurse before there was anything really to give the patients outside of the palliative treatments versus afterwards. What was that experience like for you as a healthcare provider?
I worked in the children's ward, but it wasn't too far from the adult wards. The children didn't have as dramatic a response to the cure, but the adults did, and they literally danced in the wards, and they were so joyous that their fellow patients were going home to be cured, and they didn't have to stay in the facility. So everyone was looking forward to the drug working for them. That's pretty much what I can remember. The jubilation and satisfaction that something was being done for them, that they
And
weren't going to die.
and for the children, they were there for so long, and oftentimes, and in the book, it talks about how sometimes children were abandoned. It was sometimes, I think you described, Maria, one of the parts is a parent trying to come and retrieve their child, and Seaview wouldn't release their child.
That was go ahead, Virginia, and I can comment after.
Yes, some of the children were there for a long period of time, but if they were positive, they weren't allowed to go home. They had to stay in until they too tested negative.
The child that Joanna is referring to is Mamie Daniel's little brother.
Mhm.
And her name in the book is Mamie Blair. So she had a little brother, a 3-year-old little brother, George, and Mamie was very sick. And the parent and the city came in one day. She told me this story and took her brother away, because they were afraid he was going to get sick. And what used to happen earlier in the 30s was they had these places called privatoriums, where they would take children mainly away from immigrants and African Americans because they thought that they were incapable of taking care of them properly, and they wanted to acculture them to American culture. And so they would take these kids and put them in a privatorium to prevent them from being sick. And so what must have happened with her little brother is the same thing. They had taken him and kept him at Seaview, and his mother couldn't get him out. And she would tell her daughter, if you were well, you would help me, you would help me. And so there's a moment in the book where Mamie goes home for Christmas and they won't let her brother go home, even though he never got sick. And she said they were trying to tell my mom that she couldn't take care of him. And so that was a really she told me this story again and again, that her brother never got sick and he actually stayed in there longer. She was the one who helped get him out when she was released after she was made well by isoniazid. And they thought that her mom was incapable of taking care of him because they were very, very poor.
Most of the patients there were poor.
Willa, if you want to ask your question to Miss Allen, you can go ahead. Willa, do you want to ask your question?
Oh.
Oh, I see. You're in the library. I understand. Miss Virginia, she asks, can you speak to the cost of time of the cleaning, the washing, the starching of the nurses' whites, and what remedies were used to keep them white, or getting blood or other stains out? of the
Well, when we were
uniforms?
working with patients, we wore an apron, like a cotton apron that covered most of us. When we weren't working with patients who were actively, had active tuberculosis. So when you took off your apron, you were still clean. And of course, it did take a lot of washing and starching and shining of shoes, because I used to polish my shoes and shine them afterwards. So it did take quite a lot of time doing that. But that was a labor of love. You always wanted to look your best. And I never wore the clothing that I worked in at Seaview home. I always changed.
A lot of the nurses' families talked about that. They, helping their grandmothers or aunts or moms, spit shine the shoes, iron the caps, and starch the nurses' whites for them.
And could I just say something about, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. My mom says that the patients had to change the sheets sometimes at the hospital. She mentioned that one time that they needed to change the sheets. I'm not sure how true that was or wasn't.
It's a possibility in the adult wards, but in the children's wards, we did everything for them.
Mm-hmm.
We were the teacher, the mother, the aunt, the sister, their playmates.
I think what your mom said is true. They were so short-staffed. And as Leah mentioned, they had one nurse for 30 to 40 people, which was a huge burden, because people who were not ambulatory TB nursing, they could be bedside for 3 hours taking care of somebody, like I mentioned in the book, Mr. Albert, who needed shaving and changing and could not move. The average time there was about 30 to 35 minutes. And so they had to do the bedside nursing on top of everything else, keeping the log and then the linens and all the other stuff that came along. All of that stuff was done by the nurses, organizing the medicine. Miss Virginia, probably speak to it, like, organizing the linen closet. I remember looking at the logbook and there was a note in there from the supervisor and it said, please fold the linens properly. And there was another note that said, please, that apparently, I guess, the supervisor was getting angry because they kept, the linens kept going to the laundry too quickly and they didn't have enough to restock them. So there was also, a shortage of supplies constantly at the hospital. So it doesn't surprise me that they were also tasked, ask the patients to help out by changing the bed sheets.
That was part of their recovery therapy.
Mm-hmm.
That could have been part of their recovery therapy.
Makes sense.
There's a question here for me. Joanna, do you want to read it or should I read it?
Oh, you could take it.
So it's from Dr. McCamey. She said, how has writing this story and interacting with so many families, attending so many fireside chats and traveling all over, how has this changed you and what have you learned and what has been most, oh my goodness, life-changing, profound thing that comes to mind in the midst of travels? So it has been okay, I'll just start with how has it changed me? This has been one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life. I'm so grateful and blessed to have met all of these incredible people who now I feel like they are my extended family in many ways. They will always, like, my daughter has basically from the age of 4 grown up hearing about these people and she's met so many of them. And in 2 weeks, she'll come with me to 4 events, which are going to be awesome. And then it is changed. Okay, so what I think I've learned the most is I'm not a nurse. I have spent so much time with nurses today, and my personal experience with nurses was when my mother was dying of cancer for 2 years and my father was dying, it was the nurses that kept me together. I was very young when my mother was dying, and so I wasn't savvy. I didn't know how to navigate a medical system the way I did when my father died a few years ago. But they were the ones who held me together. And then I had spent years volunteering at Boston Children's on the bone marrow transplant unit, and saw this palliative care these nurses were giving to so many families. And then I saw COVID, and I saw how we were treating the nurses, how they were undervalued, how they were underpaid. And so now talking to them, I think the most profound thing I've learned is that we treat our medical professionals like they are expendable. We expect them to hold together a healthcare system that is frayed, it is fraying, it is falling apart. We put them in danger. We don't give them the supplies they need, and we should be paying them a salary that would allow them to retire tomorrow forever. And I say that with the utmost, like, I can't understand how nursing is not, they are the backbones of hospitals. They should be paid a salary, the highest of salaries. You know, how somebody who owns a hospital is making more money than the people who are holding it together is mind-boggling. And so if I could use my voice to further that, to talk about the healthcare system, that it is a two-tiered healthcare system. There is still, I hear from nurses all the time, the systemic racism, the microaggressions they face. I got emails, you know, nurses talking about violence on the wards, that it resonates with them in the book. And then I get, you know, emails from patients who get mad because there's not enough staff. And they're like, oh, I'm in a hospital that's like Seaview, you know, and there's not enough nurses and no one's paying attention to me. But the nurses that come are nice. So I think that's really what I've learned. And I've also learned that if you have somebody in your life, listen to their stories. Every single family story matters. Like, I spent years listening to my grandfather tell me he came to America with 3 socks. Literally, he had a pair and another sock. And he would tell me these stories, and I was like, oh my God, he has to stop talking, you know, but I'm so grateful that he did. And I wish I would have written them down and recorded him. So if you do, please record these stories, tell your loved ones their stories, because your history matters. And it may not become part of a big global history, but it's your history. And it matters. And so I think in a nutshell, that's really what it's been. It's been a beautiful journey, and I can't wait to keep, you know, for what comes ahead. I hope somebody picks it up and makes it a big giant movie, and it becomes, I hope all these nurses become household names the way Hidden Figures are, you know, and I think, you know, people like Nydia, who I've asked to go, and even Leah and Virginia, to really painful places. That's the other thing. That, you know, people went to really, really painful places in their lives, as we heard, to talk about this and be part of it. So I'm thankful, and I'm thankful for everybody who has participated, you know, DNCs of color, Dr. McCamey, Dr. Seltzer, and I don't have the list of the people who supported us in this, the American Nurses Association, the Black Nurses Association. I'm thinking off the top of my head now, Coppin State University, is it? And I'm forgetting the rest of them. But thank you all for embracing this story and for passing it along. So yeah.
Edwina, I see your hand is up. Do you want to close us out?
I have a quick comment and a question for Miss Virginia. And my comment first is to the person who posed a question about the uniforms. I appreciate that, because as the daughter of a nurse, I had to do that. And it was for that reason that I said, I'm never going to be a nurse. And here I am 50 years later about to get my DNP. So, and now because of this story, I feel like it is such a privilege to have done that. And so me and my mom will have different conversations. But I do want to ask Miss Virginia, I'm thinking about, like, operationally, one of the things in today's work environment that nurses will bicker about it, the change or shift, is what their assignment is and who's going to get what patient and who's not going to get what patient. So I'm just wondering, when you were practicing, what kind of conversations did you have at the change or shift around assignments, or was that even a topic of discussion?
It was not a topic of discussion. You took your assignment and you did it. And I'm happy to say my daughter became a nurse also.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Hopefully it was because of her association with me. She was very successful.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Certainly. That was Edwina McCurry.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm
my
trying to
goodness.
put faces to names.
Oh, okay. Guess that was me.
She's got her Zoom face on today.
I do. Don't want to see the unzoom face.
Okay, well, we'll take the Zoom face then.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness. I just put in the chat, if you feel so compelled just to share how these sessions have inspired you, the story of the Black Angels or anything in the book, um just to hear some inspired stories and some high vibrations as we close out. But again, this book session started because of Virginia's charge and me just dropping in Maria's spirit and being like, we're doing a book club. And she's like, we're doing this. And Joanna's like, yes, we're doing this. And so shout out to Joanna. She literally has been a godsend. She created that online learning platform, the Google Classroom, which is world class. She is putting that EDD degree together, and we are getting her money's worth in that piece of platform that she has put together. So please utilize those resources. And thanks to Maria for sharing the archives that she has of the pictures and clippings and everything that really has given a depth and breadth to this book club. And I'm just so grateful for the circle that's around us that believes in us and supports us. And again, just want to give a shout out to our partners in this book club event. I do believe Dr. Katie Boston Leary is still with us, but if not, thank you for her being the liaison for the American Nurses Association and the National Commission to Address Racism in Nursing to have them be on board with donating books and also lending her expertise as a speaker. So really grateful for her and then the commission. Also grateful for the National Black Nurses Association. Shout out to Dr. Vivian Pierce McDaniel, who's the former interim executive director, and for her lending her expertise and also support of this wonderful book club. The Association of the Black Nursing Faculty, Coppin State University School of Nursing, Helene Fultz, the School of Nursing, the Black Nurse Collaborative, the Black Student Nurses Association at the Johns Hopkins School of Nursing. My students, so very proud of them in their session. Proud professor here, shameless plug. Also, again, just giving a huge, huge thanks to the Nurses You Should Know team for their work in truly amplifying nursing history specific to nurses of color and their profound impact that they've made in nursing, our history, and ensuring that these stories will be told. So thank you, thank you, thank you again to everyone for coming out and sharing your energy, your time, your Saturdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I know for me here in Baltimore, it's very rainy and I'm looking like, woo, but just really glad to share this time. Thank you to Nydia for amplifying and sharing your mom's story and her legacy. Thank you to Leah representing your mom. I know she's not feeling well, but grateful to both of you for carrying on and sharing this time with us. Really, really grateful for you both. And then again, Maria, thank you so much for rolling with what our crazy ideas are. Just really grateful for your expertise, your humbleness, and your willingness to share and be the vessel to amplify these stories, and just really, really honored to work with you. And Miss Virginia, thank you for putting us to work. It has been an honor and a privilege to share time, space with you and also be of service to you and helping to carry on the legacy that you're living. And I hope that you are living your best life right now with all the flowers that you're receiving and the wonderful places that you're going, and just really grateful for the work and time and sacrifice and the wisdom that you've imparted in us and the inspiration that you've breathed into so many people, just representing your crew, the Black Angel Nurses. So thank you again. Thank you, everyone. And we wish you well on your Saturday.
Yeah.
And I will miss you guys next Saturday, but I'll be
I
happy
know.
to enjoy a Saturday. Often.
Thank
for
you.
having
And
me.
delightful.
Yeah,
Thank
appreciate
you. I learned a lot.
Thanks, Miss Virginia. Appreciate you.
And that's what it's all about, learning something new every day.
Absolutely.
And there's the
Mama
mic
sends her
drop.
best.
Thanks, Leah. Thanks, Nydia.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Maria. And thank you, Miss Virginia.